I shall never forget how I was roused one night by the groans of a fellow prisoner, who threw himself about in his sleep, obviously having a horrible nightmare. Since I had always been especially sorry for people who suffered from fearful dreams or deliria, I wanted to wake the poor man. Suddenly, I drew back the hand which was ready to shake him, frightened at the thing I was about to do. At that moment, I became intensely conscious of the fact that no dream, no matter how horrible, could be as bad as the reality of the camp which surrounded us, and to which I was about to recall him. Even the most horrible nightmare could not have been as bad as the reality these prisoners were living in. This speaks to an escapist element of camp life, which is only too understandable. Anything that would even slightly help the prisoners survive their suffering was welcome. That's including the main symptom of camp routine, the second phase of camp life. Apathy was a necessary mechanism of self-defense. Reality dimmed and all efforts, all emotions were centered on one task: preserving one's own life and that of the other fellow. It was typical to hear the prisoners, while they were being herded back to the camp from their work sites in the evening, sigh with relief and say, "Well, another day is over." It can be readily understood that such a state of strain, coupled with the constant necessity of concentrating on the task of staying alive, forced the prisoner's inner life down to a primitive level. Several of my colleagues in camp who were trained in psychoanalysis often spoke of a regression in the camp inmate, a retreat to a more primitive form of mental life. His wishes and desires became obvious in his dreams. What did the prisoners dream about most frequently? Of bread, cake, cigarettes, and nice warm baths. The lack of having these simple desires satisfied led him to seek wish fulfillment in his dreams. Whether these dreams did any good is another matter. The dreamer had to wake from them to the reality of camp life, and to the terrible contrast between that and his dream's illusions. The fact that the prisoners reverted to dreaming about very basic things, such as bread and cigarettes, seems to align with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Typically, we dream about great things, and goals that are so grand they seem unrealistic are often dubbed dreams. We dream about opening a successful business, about traveling the world, or making a scientific discovery. But when we don't even have our basic necessities, we seem to revert back, even in our dreams, to these fundamentals at the bottom of the pyramid. We don't seem to care about self-actualization or an empty stomach, and that makes sense. But to be able to break free from reality and find solace in your inner self means you have to have something to retreat to. Something in yourself that's interesting enough to keep your mind occupied. In spite of all the enforced physical and mental primitiveness of the life in a concentration camp, it was possible for spiritual life to deepen. Sensitive people who were used to a rich intellectual life may have suffered much pain. They were often of a delicate constitution, but the damage to their inner selves was less. They were able to retreat from the terrible surroundings to a life of inner riches and spiritual freedom. Only in this way can one explain the apparent paradox that some prisoners of a less hardy makeup often seem to survive camp life better than those with a robust nature. The intensification of inner life helped the prisoner find a refuge from the emptiness, desolation, and spiritual poverty of his existence. It did so by letting him escape into the past. When given free rein, his imagination played with past events, often not important ones, but minor happenings and trifling things. His nostalgic memory glorified them, and they assumed a strange character. Their world and their existence seemed very distant, and the spirit reached out for them longingly. In my mind, I took bus rides, unlocked the front door of my apartment, answered the telephone, and switched on the electric lights. Our thoughts often centered on such details, and these memories could move one to tears. As the inner life of the prisoner tended to become more intense, he also experienced the beauty of art and nature as never before. Under the influence, he sometimes even forgot his own frightful circumstances. If someone had seen our faces on the journey from Auschwitz to a Bavarian camp, as we beheld the mountains of Salzburg with their summits glowing in the sunset, through the little barred windows of the prisoner carriage, he would never have believed that those were the faces of men who had given up all hope of life and liberty. Despite that factor, or maybe because of it, we were carried away by nature's beauty, which we had missed for so long. One evening, when we were already resting on the floor of our hut, dead tired, soup bowls in hand, a fellow prisoner rushed in and asked us to run out to the assembly grounds and see the wonderful sunset. Standing outside, we saw sinister clouds growing in the west and the whole sky alive with clouds of never-changing shapes and colors, from steel blue to blood red. The desolate grey mud huts provided a sharp contrast, while the puddles of the muddy ground reflected the glowing sky. Then, after minutes of moving silence, one prisoner said to another, "How beautiful the world could be." It is astonishing to me how the prisoners were still able to find awe in natural beauty, even in their situation. From how Frankl writes, I can kind of sense that it might have even helped them to hold on. This just shows that it isn't as simple as just looking at a pyramid of needs and thinking that I need to satisfy from bottom to top, and if I don't have enough food, a beautiful sunset is worthless to me. Now, this notion isn't totally wrong, but also we're more complicated than that. To me, it kind of makes sense to think about it in terms of that there are things that seem so far out of reach we don't even dare to think about them. Undernourishment makes a lot of things seem far out of reach, and it probably also explains the fact that the sexual urge was generally absent, which a psychologist was bound to observe in those all-male camps. That, as opposed to all other strictly male establishments, such as army barracks, there was little sexual perversion. Even in his dreams, the prisoner did not seem to concern himself with sex. With the majority of these prisoners, the primitive life and the effort of having to concentrate on just saving one's skin led to a total disregard of anything not serving that purpose, which explained the prisoner's complete lack of sentiment. This was brought home to me on my transfer from Auschwitz to a camp affiliated with Dachau. The train, which carried us, about 2,000 prisoners, passed through Vienna. At about midnight, we passed one of the Viennese railway stations. The track was going to lead us past the street where I was born, past the house where I had lived for many years of my life, in fact until I was taken prisoner. There were 50 of us in the prison car, which had 2 small barred peepholes. There was only enough room for one group to squat on the floor, while the other, who had to stand up for hours, crowded round the peepholes. Standing on tiptoe looking past the others' heads through the bars of the window, I caught an eerie glimpse of my native town. We all felt more dead than alive, since we thought that our transport was heading for the camp of Mauthausen, and that we had only 1 or 2 weeks to live. I had a distinct feeling that I saw the streets, the squares, and the houses of my childhood with the eyes of a dead man who had come back from another world and was looking down on a ghostly city. After hours of delay, the train left the station, and there was the street, my street. The young lads, who had a number of years of camp life behind them and for whom such a journey was a great event, stared attentively through the peephole. I began to beg them to let me stand in front for one moment only. My request was refused with rudeness and cynicism. "You lived here all those years? Well, then you have seen quite enough already." So Frankl was refused the one time he thought he would be able to see something from his old life before he died. One small glimpse of the house he grew up in to refresh his memory one last time. Now this is the kind of heartbreaking feeling that I honestly can't even really imagine. But I can show you the house. Let's go. Hold on, I gotta get down to the metro station first. Walk down there, get on the train, get off, and I think this is it. This is the house that Frankl wanted to see through the train one last time before he thought he was going to be brought to Mauthausen and killed by the Nazis. But you know, he wasn't killed by the Nazis. He survived. And the feeling when he came back here and saw it again after the liberation, after the war, must have been overwhelming. And that's what I want to talk to you about in the next video. Thank you for watching.